and welcome to this tutorial on a few basic but important functions that are used in Excel. In this video, we'll be covering functions like count, HLOOKUP, and VLOOKUP. Now let's get started. So how do we use the count function? Let me go ahead and create a column here. Oh, whoops, sorry about that. So say I want to count the number of different scores for a particular student. All I have to do is type in equals, which is what every formula starts with. Then you type count, and it gives you an entire list of count functions. Let me select the first count function, and then it's asking for values. Now, I just want to count the number of scores that there are. Select the range, close parenthesis, and hit Enter. So it says we have 2 scores for this particular student. Then we can drag and drop the formula for the other students as well. Since we have 2 scores for all the students, score 1 and score 2, the count is 2 for all of them. Now let's look at the next function. First, I'll go ahead and delete a few of the scores. And then I'll go to the second count function, count A, click on count A, select the range, close the parenthesis, and hit Enter. And similarly, you can drag and drop for the other rows. Now you can see a difference. The count for Max is 2 because there's data in both the score 1 and score 2 columns. But for Dan, it's only 1 because we don't have a score 2. And this is what count A does. It only counts those cells which have data. So it ignores the blank cells. The third formula is count blank, which is quite the opposite of count A. This counts only the blanks. So we type count blank, select range, close parenthesis, Enter, and drag and drop. You can see there are no blank scores here, so the count is 0. Here there's 1 blank, so the count is 1, and so on for the other columns and rows as well. The next count function is COUNTIF. COUNTIF is used to count the range that matches a particular criteria. So COUNTIF, the range, comma, I have to give a criteria. So let's say if a score is greater than 20, then it should be counted. So the criteria would be greater than 20 within double quotes, and close the parenthesis. Now the count is changed to 1 because there's only 1 score, 35, which is greater than 20. And you can similarly drag and drop for the other cells. So only this row has a score which is greater than 20. There's also the COUNTIFS formula, where you can add multiple criteria for a range. Alright, now let's move to the VLOOKUP function. The VLOOKUP function is used to look up something in a range of cells and retrieve data that's in the same row as the value you're looking for. The V in VLOOKUP stands for vertical. It looks up a value in the leftmost column of a table and returns the corresponding value from a column to the right. Now let's see how to use the VLOOKUP function. In this main sheet, I have student names and their scores. In the second sheet, I have students' names and the classes they belong to. Say my requirement is to get the classes of the students in the student sheet. This can be achieved by using the VLOOKUP function. I'm going to create an additional column here, student class, For getting the class details here, I'll have to type equals VLOOKUP, followed by lookup value, and here my lookup value will be for Maxwell, whose class I'm going to pick from sheet 1. That is followed by a comma, and then a table array. Here my table array is sheet 1. I'll have to select these two columns, I should always select the table array starting with the column which I'm going to take as a reference in my master sheet. So here I would take the full name as my VLOOK reference. So I'm going to select from the full name up to the result which I want in the student sheet. So now VLOOK value is done table array, followed by the column index number from which you're taking the class data. So here we've selected 1 and 2 columns, and our data's in the second column of the selection. So we enter 2, comma. It asks for the exact match or partial match. In this case, we want an exact match. So select 0. Close the parenthesis and hit Enter. Now, Class 1, which Maxwell belongs to, is successfully referenced here. We can choose to drag it so that the classes of all the other students are automatically picked up. For instance, Sydney belongs to Class 6. Let's go to Sheet 1. And Sydney is indeed in Class 6. So this is all about the VLOOK function. Now let's move to the HLOOKUP function. HLOOKUP function is used to look up data from a specific row and retrieve data from a corresponding column. In a way, it's similar to the VLOOKUP function. The H in HLOOKUP stands for horizontal, where lookup values appear in the first row of the table, moving horizontally towards the right. Now let's see where to use the HLOOKUP function and how to use it. Now in Sheet 2, I have IDs of students, which are in my Sheet 1. To retrieve these IDs from Sheet 2 to the desired sheet, I have to use the HLOOKUP function. So let me add a column here, student ID, and I'm going to do an HLOOKUP. Equals HLOOKUP, so here the lookup value would be Maxwell, comma, select the table array here, selecting the IDs with the student names, followed by our row index number should be 2, because we're referencing row 1, but the data we want is in row 2. So I type 2 here, comma, 0 for exact match, close parenthesis, hit Enter. Here you go. And here we've got the ID of the first student. Similarly, drag and drop it here. The error is because we have not frozen this particular lookup value. And the HLOOKUP value will have to belong to this particular row. So what we should be doing here is select the HLOOKUP formula, click on the range here, and freeze it. To freeze it, put your cursor here and press F4. Oops, sorry. Just keep your cursor here, and then press F4. Similarly for the other range as well, F4. And now we have frozen or locked the range. Now if you drag and drop, You can see the IDs reflecting from that sheet to this sheet. Now, a question you may ask is, why freeze the range? The reason is that the IDs which I'm going to HLOOKUP will always be in row number 2 here. And the names which I'm going to take as reference will always be in row number 1. This is basically the reason behind my freezing the range, just to explain it a bit. But let me now unfreeze the range. And now I'm going to drag this to the other cells as well. Why it doesn't pick the right IDs is because here, for the first cell, my formula range is B1 to E2. And when we drag it, the ranges change incrementally. For the next cell, it is B2 to E3. The next one, it's B3 to E4. And so on, and so on. So my range is getting changed here. So Dan Brown here is given a range between B2 to E3 in sheet 2, which is blank, as you can see here. Therefore, it's taking into consideration a range which actually does not have the IDs in the student name. Hence, the formula shows you a not available error, since there's no available data in this particular range. It's a similar case for the other cells as well. So you want to freeze the range because it's only B1 to E2 where we have our data. And only row 2 has the IDs. So I have to freeze the range to correctly fetch the IDs from the table. Now I am going to freeze it again. Now that I've frozen the row, range. Now when I drag the same range, B1 to E2, it gets replicated for all the other cells here. And now let's move on to the last function, which is indexing. Indexing can be used instead of the VLOOKUP formula. One of the disadvantages of using the VLOOKUP formula is you have to give the index number of the column from which we are going to fetch the data. So here, if the class data is here, let me just cut and paste it here. So when I'm going to apply VLOOK formula here, I have to select the column index number. Here it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's in the 7th column. So my formula has the lookup range from B to not C, but rather my range would be B to H. Let me type that here. And the column index number would be 7. Hit Enter, and now you've retrieved the class. So the difficulty is that you have to count the column and take the column index number. Whereas if you use the index formula, you need not bother about the column index number of where exactly the data is, present. Let me apply the index formula to retrieve the classes exactly like we've done using the VLOOKUP formula. Let me delete these formulas here. And now I'm going to do an index match formula, which is equals index, open parenthesis, array. And here the array is the data which you want to fetch in this particular cell. So our data is in sheet 1 in column H. So select our data and comma. Now we're going to put a match to reference the name in the student sheet to the name in the sheet 1. So type match, open parenthesis, and now it's asking for a lookup value. So our lookup value is the name here. So select this range, the cell D2 where we have the name. Now we'll have to go back to sheet 1 and select the range where the name is present. So sheet 1, select the name. We would want an exact match, so 0, and remember to close both of the brackets. Enter, and here we go. Now we've got the classes. Drag and drop this to the other cells. So without even taking the column index number into consideration, we've just selected the range here and got the data we wanted. This formula can be very useful whenever you have multiple columns in your data range. And that is all about the count, VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, and index functions. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you in the next video.